You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, a semi-weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Join your host, Steph, on Wednesday mornings to chat about seasons, Sabbats, and all new witchcraft topics to help you make your life more magical. Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. I'm Steph, and I have a guest here with me today to chat about her book and a couple of other fun topics that I particularly love. So I'm going to turn it over, allow her to introduce herself, and let you know where you can find her online.
Hello, hi. My name is Asa West. I'm a writer. I'm an author. I have a new book coming out called Witch Blood Rising, which is kind of a memoir slash guide to being a witch. And yeah, you can find me online. My handle on social media is the Red Tail Witch. Red tail as in a fox or a red-tailed hawk. And my website is asawestauthor.com.
Well, thanks so much for being here. Congratulations on your newest book coming out.
Thank you.
I feel like that is a bit of a scary topic and way to write when it is your own life story in there.
Yes, it's terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying. They make you sign, give people release forms if they appear in the book, and then that puts thoughts in your head like, oh no, what if I misremembered something? What if I'm getting something wrong? What if someone doesn't like how I'm writing about them? But even more than that, yeah, it's you can't really tell your story without revealing some pretty personal, vulnerable stuff. And so that's pretty intimidating.
What made you decide to even go that route? Because it's not your first book, and it's not like your first foray into witchcraft and writing for witchcraft community. So what made you finally decide to put this story on paper?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, I feel like every beginning I start at, I realize, oh no, wait, but there was a beginning before that. Like it just goes back and back. So as I read other people's writing throughout the years, especially things like memoir and personal essays and blog posts, right, where people were telling their own stories, I always noticed something, which was that no matter how vulnerable someone got, and no matter how specific their story seemed to be, like this one very unique thing happened to me, right? There were always readers who could relate to that, Like there were always readers who would say, this really touches me, like this reminds me of something that happened in my own life. Thank you so much for letting me know that like I'm not alone, right? I felt alone before I read this. And I had that response to other people's writing as a reader myself. I would see these conversations happening. And so when I started to kind of come out of my shell as a writer, right? So my background is actually in fiction writing. Like I have an MFA in fiction, and I would always cloak my stories in fiction, right? Change the names, change the setting, hope that no one realizes that it's you. Um, but as I started to realize, like, actually, you know what? It sounds like it's okay to be vulnerable. I gradually kind of let myself do that. And I'd been kind of like, I had been blogging throughout the years. And so I guess I had already been, kind of telling my story there. But it was just a very gradual process of realizing, like, if I tell my stories, then there will be readers out there who will relate to them and who will be able to, to take something from them into their own lives and, feel like it helped them and like it touched them.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's really helpful for a lot of people. And it comes across in your book because right in the beginning chapters, you touch on things in your childhood that are pretty tough. There are some tough subjects in there that come up very quickly.
Yes, yeah.
And I think a lot of witches are going to appreciate that because you do cover that feeling of loneliness and otherness that I think a lot of witches feel and don't have the words to express.
That's my hope, right? Is that like they'll read it and they'll think, oh my gosh, that's me, like that's exactly how I felt. So yeah, so in the book, like with my childhood, I write about having these like kind of spiritual experiences that I didn't really know how to process, right? Like kind of like strange dreams or feeling drawn to, to nature, to what I didn't realize at the time was witchcraft, right? Um, and at the time I thought like this is just me. Like I'm just a weirdo. There's no one else like me in the entire world, and that sucks, and I'm sad, right? And I think there were a lot of other kids around who felt the exact same way, but we didn't know that each other were out there.
Yeah, that absolutely. I think kids especially go through that in such a difficult way because they just don't know how to express what
Mhm.
everything you just said.
Right, exactly.
It's not something that comes to us until we're older. We're like, oh, okay, we're all weird.
Yeah, right, right, And it's funny, like sometimes it comes to us like when we go into like just the right bookstore, right? And we see a book on the shelf and we realize, wait a minute, like this is me sitting on the shelf. That was one of my first experiences discovering witchcraft actually was the whoever was the book buyer at my local tiny little bookstore. This is way before like Borders, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. This is like back in the 80s and 90s. Um, Whoever the book buyer was decided to buy a book on witchcraft and put it on the shelf, and I found it, right? Like high school me found it. Um, and then I think for other people, it's the internet, right? Like you find the right place on the internet and your world just explodes.
And I also particularly liked your story about your friend Nancy. I was like, oh, I think I was the Nancy for a lot of people.
Yeah, right. Right.
Where you found her, flipping through like a witchy magazine of like witchy clothes. Like
Right, right,
it's
yeah.
so like quintessential 80s, 90s. I'm like, I love that so much. Like the clothing magazines. Oh my gosh, so cute.
Right. Well, so this is something for like for any like younger listeners right now, they're going to be like,
What
what
is
do you
that?
Right, like so this was not on a website. This catalog, I want to say it was the Pyramid catalog. If you like scour the internet, you can find remnants of it. But yeah, it was actually like a paper catalog that arrived in the mail if you knew where to send away for it. And yeah, it had like velvet dresses and silver jewelry and altar supplies. I grew up in a very like kind of like evangelical Christian suburb, right? So it was funny, this catalog, it had stuff that I had never seen before, but I was able to kind of like cross-reference it with the little book on witchcraft that I had gotten from the bookstore. And we're like, oh, okay, this big knife thing is an athame. Oh, interesting. Okay. Oh, the bell. Here's what you do with the bell, It was very much this kind of little detective hunt.
I feel that so much because I, to this day, love Velvet. And I have a lot of like friends, like fellow 80s and 90s kids that are like, oh my God, no more Velvet. What are you do? What is wrong with you?
Oh,
Stop it. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. It goes deep.
okay. We only live one life, right? Or maybe I don't know. We only live one life that we know of. And so if you want velvet, like this is your chance to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just like a deep witch. I wonder how many listeners feel me on that. You guys let me know in the comments or over on Spotify if you are also this Velvet lover that like left over from your childhood. It's like
Yes.
a very witchy thing, like a witchy fabric. I don't know.
Oh, yes. Yes. Especially like a nice like dark color of velvet, like a dark green, a burgundy.
Yes,
Oh, yes.
exactly. But something else that I really love is like it's not in your book. It's just not, telling your story and like these fun stories from childhood or kind of like sad stories from childhood. You also have rituals, spells at the end of each chapter to sort of guide the reader along with you to actually put these things into practice. And I absolutely love the way that that is set up.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, so for any listeners, each chapter of the book is like a story from my life, and the story is interspersed with like hopefully like helpful, information about how to be a witch, how to do witchcraft. And then at the end of each chapter, there's a little, I don't know, is it a spell? Is it a guided meditation? What exactly did I end up making? I'm not sure. I've been thinking of them as just the interstitials, right? Um, but yeah, it's a little guided meditation in the form of kind of a little story. So in the first one, I believe I have readers searching for a castle, and then they're going to enter the castle. And my hope with these is that they'll work on kind of two levels, depending on what the reader wants to do with them. Either you can treat it like a traditional guided meditation where you record yourself speaking it, and then you listen to it in a meditative state and you visualize it, right? And then you kind of just see what bubbles up out of your subconscious or out of the other world. Um, and you get what you need from it that way. The other way that I kind of hope it will work, because I have had things like spells that have worked this way for me in my life, is that you read it and you let it settle into your subconscious. And then you go out and you look for the things in the meditation to show up in your real life, right? So with the castle meditation, I'm hoping that at least for some readers, they'll read it, they'll set an intention like, now that I've read this, now that I've read this meditation, I'm going to go out and I'm going to search for my castle, and they will find their castle somewhere in the landscape in which they live. Maybe if they're in, the UK, maybe they'll find a literal castle, which I'm super jealous, but awesome, you know. Or maybe I don't know, maybe they'll see a billboard with a castle on it. Maybe they'll see a rock that looks like a castle. But my hope is that spirit will guide them to whatever their castle is going to be for them. And then they will find something spiritually useful for them there. So that's what the idea is with the meditations.
I really enjoy that. I think it's left open to a lot of interpretation, which I know that some people can, myself included, can struggle with that sometimes because I like, like rigid rules and,
Of
telling me
course,
what to do
yeah.
step by step. But at the same time, that's like such a helpful exercise in just broadening your mind and finding out from the universe what you really need in that moment.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm hoping, like, I say in the introduction, like like, I do not expect readers to go through and do every single one of these meditations. You can maybe do one that calls to you. You can do all of them, if you want, or you could even pick them apart and decide, like, well, I'm not going to do the first half of this meditation, but this one image really speaks to me, so I'm actually going to take that and use that. It's very non-prescriptive. I hope that it will be very kind of free and open for people to use however they want.
I think that readers are definitely going to appreciate that because it's a fine line when you're sharing your story and sharing a memoir to make sure that your audience is still connecting with that when it's such a personal story to you. You never really know. But
Sure.
it's such a great way to keep them engaged and understand that like we're not all alone in this, or there really is like some common denominators here.
Right, of course, yeah.
So something else that comes up in your book, but I know is also one of your favorite topics, so I want to talk about it too, is pop
Yeah.
culture witchcraft.
Yeah, pop culture.
Because I have mentioned it on the podcast before, it's one of my favorite topics. So anytime somebody's like, let's do it, I'm like, yes, please, let's talk about it. So
Right.
how did that come up for you? I know you touch on it in the book, but where did that start, this pop culture witch love?
Right, yeah. Well, so other witches have talked about they like growing up kind of in like rural, pastoral, like very natural settings, right? Like, oh, when I was a kid, I always ran into the forest. I always, spoke to the trees. I did this, I did that. Um, like I said, I grew up in a very manicured, very kind of tamed suburb, right? So green lawns, palm trees, that was it. So I really didn't have the opportunity to go into nature all that much. I mean, we would go camping and, occasionally we would go hiking, my family and I. But it just wasn't the same as like being immersed every day into this beautiful, rich, natural world, right? And so I kind of had to get witchcraft where I could find it. And so when I was in high school, I was just starting to find out that witchcraft existed, right? Like, so my friend from high school brought this catalog to school. I found this one book in the bookstore that caught my eye. It was The Practice of Witchcraft Today by Robin Skelton, by the way. That's the book that I found in the 90s in a little bookstore. But then when I was in high school, the movie The Craft came out. So if you haven't seen The Craft, you have to see it. It is just, it's I think it's one of the best witchcraft movies of all time. I think it was meant to be just kind of like a, just like yet another teen horror movie, right? Like, write it, film it, get it out there, move on to the next film. But just the alchemy came together and it ended up being just really, really good, right? They got like an actual Wiccan consultant to write the spells. They sought out these really beautiful sets and landscapes for the different scenes. And I saw that movie and my teenage mind was just blown away. I thought like, oh my, I've never encountered anything like this before. And so that really supercharged, my quest to find out everything about witchcraft. And so to this day, I love just any representation of witches in pop culture. Agatha All Along, the Marvel show, just came out last fall. I loved it. And it was the same deal. Like they sought out actual information about actual witches. And you can see that coming up in the, in the show, in the way they portray the witches in the show. Um, yeah, in a practice that is kind of as fringe as ours, is non-mainstream, you leap for representation wherever you can find it,
I finally got to watch Agatha. I did not watch it when it came out, because I am an incredibly impatient person and I had to have them all out at once. So I was like,
Yeah.
nope, I'm not doing this week by week. So I finally got to sit down and watch all of that, and I had such a great time, and I had such a great
Yeah.
time explaining the witch stuff to my husband, who was like, yes, you are going to listen to everything that I have to say on this because I listened to you through all of the Captain Americas. Okay. So
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you got to have that exchange.
yes, because I before that was not like a like only like the basics of like the Marvel stuff. I've never seen like all of the movies, certainly not in order
Sure.
that you're supposed to and all of those things. Like I
Oh, yeah.
like never did the comic book, so I did not know like all of that. So for like all of the other movies that I've watched, he's always like explaining this stuff, and I'm like, oh, this one is me.
Yes. Yeah. The nice thing about Agatha is that you don't have to watch 10 movies and 15 TV shows to know what's going
Right.
on. You have to kind of, you can catch up if you haven't seen anything, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Because like I had only seen like a couple of things, and
Sure.
he was able to explain like some of the, you know, important parts, but I was able to explain like all of the witchy stuff. And it was kind of amazing, like, yeah, that they did do research and like there was like accurate things in there. I love when that
Yes.
happens in the pop culture representations because it's not always accurate, but like
Hmm.
the new Sabrina, like the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, there's a lot in there that actually is accurate.
There is. Yeah.
Fun.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
mean, like some of it is like totally like crazy and off the walls, of course, because the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina has like devil and sacrifice and things and
Of course. Yeah.
not that it's dramatized for Hollywood, but like there's so much in there that's actually accurate. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love watching this. And I think like the more that
Mhm.
comes out in modern day, the more accurate it is. I'm like, this is fun.
Right, yeah. And what's really fun about it is that it creates like I always think of it as a feedback loop, right? So someone seeks out like actual witchcraft to put into their pop culture thing, whether it's a show or a movie or whatever. People watch it, they see the actual witchcraft in it, because like you can always see it, right? And they think, that's really cool. That really is genuinely speaking to me. And then they go out and seek out actual witchcraft. Maybe they become a practicing witch, who knows? And then witchcraft is kind of, revitalized and it grows a little bit and it evolves a little bit. And then pop culture starts taking from that too, right? And so it's this interesting, I find it so fascinating how, witchcraft and pop culture, they're constantly feeding each other in this really unexpected way.
Do you find that it feeds your own practice in turn?
I do, and that's so fun. Like I feel like you're supposed to be embarrassed to admit that like you watched like a Marvel show and got something useful that you want to use in your own practice from it. But I'm gonna, again, I'm gonna get vulnerable. I'm gonna admit it. Like I find useful stuff in culture portrayals of witchcraft, and sometimes I use it, I haven't actually like done this in circle yet, but I love the Ballad of the Witch's Road in the Agatha show. Um, this idea of like what is it? It's like this idea of a spell or a ritual being a road that you're walking, right? And when you get to the end of the road, like that's the culmination of the magical working. But actually, there's a spoiler for the show, but actually, as we learn, it's also the beginning, right? It's a circle. I think they really tapped into something with that, and I really like that. And I would not be shocked if I figured out a way to use that someday.
I like that one. Yeah, no, I do it all the time. To this day, the pretty much only protection symbol that I use in my own practice is from Buffy, from Willow.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
and it works, and it's if it's effective, I'm not going to change it. And I picked that up from whatever that episode came out
Right.
way
Exactly.
back when, and I still use it. It still works. So I love finding things like that
Yeah.
I still use.
Right. I mean, witches are like we're foragers, right? Like we find things in nature that we can use, herbs and artifacts, and we find things in the cultural zeitgeist that we can use. Actually, in one of the chapters in the book, it's the chapter on tarot and cartomancy. I talk about like how interesting it is that our ancestors picked up packs of playing cards and they said, cool, well, I could play a card game with this. And also I'm going to tell my fortune with these just little paper cards. That's a very creative act, and it was enduring enough that like to this day, people use playing cards and tarot cards, which were originally playing cards, to do often pretty intense divination.
Yeah, and I find that fascinating. It's not that I would have never been creative enough to have come up with that like they did, but to
Mhm.
use it still today is just amazing to me. And then to find that it works and I get accurate results from it is really fun.
Right, right, yeah.
So you get like the creative, you get the pop culture, you get the ancestral connection.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So I know you do tarot because you offer
Mhm.
tarot readings.
Yes.
So what else do you regularly do in your practice? Do you have anything that you do daily, weekly, monthly?
Yeah, well, so things can get pretty hard when you are like me and you're a full-time working mom, right? So I've got two kids, I've got a full-time job. These days I'm back in the office. I was working from home for a glorious 2 years, but now I'm back in the office again with a commute. Um, And so these really elaborate, beautiful rituals that I dream about, right? So going to a hilltop on the full moon, going camping and just doing ritual out in the desert or in the forest. I'm not doing any of that these days. I fantasize about it, but I'm not actually, I just can't. It's very hard for me to do something like that. So I approach my practice these days in the same way that I approach physical exercise, which is that if you can have a practice that is simple enough that you can dredge up the energy to do it every day, no matter how tired you are, that is way better than deciding that you're only going to do it when the conditions are exactly right and you can go all out, right? Um, so in not my upcoming book, but actually in my previous book, The Witch's Kin, I talk about a practice that I have called the daily greeting. And it's exactly what it sounds like. You go up to your altar and you just say hello, right? To whatever gods or spirits or familiars or ancestors or whoever is living on your altar, you just go up and you just make sure you say hello to them every day. Um, I consider the word hello to be just as sacred a word as any spell or prayer or incantation. I think hello is a sacred word when we say it to someone else, right? Because it means I'm here, I'm showing up, I am paying attention to you. And I think it's sacred when we say it at our altars. And so my daily practice is I say hello and then I just wait to see who says hello back. And I find that like sometimes, it's like any spiritual practice. Sometimes I get something really powerful, a really like a kind of lovely download that nourishes me and revitalizes me. Sometimes, I feel like I'm kind of just going through the motions. There are some days where I do it and I'm like, this is a waste of time. This is none of this stuff is real. I'm wasting my time. I have those days, right? I think everyone does. Um, but it just like exercise, right? If you keep showing up even after you have a bad day, that's when you get the good days. You're giving yourself an opportunity for the good days. And I hope that like, this practice will sustain me until I'm at a point in my life where, I do have more opportunity for the moonlit hilltop rituals and the really beautiful kind of all out rituals. But for now, like that's my practice is just the daily hello.
Oh, I love that. I think that's a beautiful practice. And I'm with you. That's like one of the maybe downsides of the pop culture, like loving the pop culture with witchcraft so much,
Mm,
is that it is very like big, elaborate, moonlit
yes.
hilltop rituals, and like, and then you want to. It's just not always the most practical thing for real life. Like it's in a movie for a reason.
That is, I mean, that's a really good point, right? Like it's no spiritual practice is ever going to be like it is in the movies, you know.
As
Even
much as we want it to.
what was that?
As much as we want it to.
Right, exactly. I mean, even for a spiritual practice that doesn't have like a lot of like VFX in it, like, oh, she literally gets struck by lightning. That's cool, right? Um, even like the non-glamorous spiritual practices in the movies, like the real versions of them are not going to be that glamorous. I think fundamentally, like spiritual work is not usually glamorous. I mean, usually it's very mundane and the effects of it are gradual and they appear kind of over time. They're not usually going to appear like boom, like lightning overnight, even
Oh,
though sometimes they
absolutely.
do.
And if you have time in your life for even one hilltop moonlit ritual, then I think that's beautiful. That's
Yes.
what more can you ask for?
Right. And I have done them and they are amazing. I highly recommend them. But, if you think like, well, my spiritual practice can only ever look like that, that's when you need to reevaluate.
Well, before we wrap up, I would love to ask you, I know you cover quite a few in the book, but just, for here and now, listeners, do you have any advice that you would like to offer beginners, especially beginners that started off like you, feeling maybe lonely and weird?
Oh gosh, yeah. Um, yeah, well, so in the book I write about neurodivergence. So I'm neurodivergent. Um, and I've found that like kind of in my journey to just figure out like who I am and what brings me joy. I've found that I've really had to listen to my instincts and have that kind of like somatic experience of what's making me happy, right? Um, I'm trying to think of a good example of like when I had that kind of like aha moment. Um, I'll just take something really mundane. So like choosing what jewelry to put on every day. For me, like I don't do kind of like costume jewelry. I don't like coordinate my jewelry with my outfit or anything. Like for me, like every necklace and ring and bracelet that I own is kind of an amulet to me, right? Like they all have a special meaning and they all do something important to me, even when I can't articulate what exactly that is. And so when I'm figuring out what to wear each day, I really have to wait for that feeling of like, it's like a physical feeling of like, yes, this one. Like my body feels happy when I touch the necklace that I want to wear that day. Again, very mundane, very tiny little detail of my day. And then I put it on and usually I stop thinking about it. But I have to listen to that physical feeling, of my body telling me like, this is the one you want to wear today. Is it just a quirk of my brain? Is it, my spirit helper just telling me like, oh, this is going to do something good for you today that you won't even notice? Who knows? I don't care. I just listen for that for that physical feeling. And so whether you're neurodivergent or not, whether you're queer or not, or this or that, I feel like you have to listen to your body when you're trying to figure out what it is you want to do, where it is you want to go, right? Um, it can't just be all in your head. Like you have to listen for that. You have to feel for that good physical feeling when you've found the right path for you. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but
No, it absolutely does. I think that's great advice.
right.
And something very simple that everybody can sort of understand and know where to start with that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess Joseph Campbell said like follow your bliss, right? Like I think that advice can mean a lot of things, but for me, part of what it means is, follow the things that make you feel like physically blissful, right? Like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what I want to be doing. This is who I want to be. It'll be a physical feeling, at least it is for me.
Yeah, and to also not ignore that, because I think sometimes we just don't trust ourselves when that comes up.
Right. Yeah. We don't trust ourselves. Or if it's something kind of out of the ordinary, like velvet, we hear that like, oh, people will laugh at me. The consequences of following my bliss will be so bad that I just don't want to do it. And that's that. Like you should try it on. You should give it a try. I've found that people laugh at way less than we think they're going to.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I wear my velvet dresses all the time. No worries.
Yes, right.
Anyone out there who also wants to wear their dark green velvet American Girl Molly dress, you go for it
Oh,
because I sure do.
there you go. All right. So proof like on the ground here. People will probably not laugh at you. And even if they do laugh at you, just
They're not
turn,
your people.
yeah, walk away.
You don't need them.
Or maybe they're laughing because they're jealous.
That's
I
right. They sure are.
don't.
Well, thank you so much for being here today and just openly chatting about your story and your practice and your book. I really appreciate it. And I know that listeners are going to appreciate it as well.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor. Thank you.
And listeners, as always, I'm going to have everything linked so you can check out the upcoming book, Witch Blood Rising. You can check out previous works, you want to book a tarot reading. All of that is going to be in the show notes, as always, and over at witchwednesdays.com. And that is everything that I have for you all this week. I will see you next week.
Need even more witchcraft in your life? Subscribe to Witch Wednesdays on Patreon and YouTube for all types of exclusive bonus content like spells, recipes, book reviews, and more, or even order personalized tarot readings and spells. Be sure to follow on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast. And you can find all these links and more at witchwednesdays.com.